always say, like with my old man, it's like, I've never been more intimidated by anyone than my father.
We have another great episode of Dead Dads for you today. We're talking to Mike Wasko.
I think Mike's really unique because his dad died over 20 years ago. And as somebody whose dad only died, just less than 2 years ago, he really taught me a lot about how his grief has evolved over the course of 20 years. And if you're a guy out there whose dad recently passed away, I think this is going to be an important episode for you to watch, because you might be angry and you might be a bit confused and you might be trying to ask yourself, how do I get through all this? Mike really breaks it down for you and shares his experience in a way that I think you can learn a lot from.
Well, I know he's keen to mention in the episode that he's not a guru. He does have a lot of experience, and that his friends have been coming to him for almost 20 years to figure out how it is when their dads die. He talks a lot about what it's like to have a dad who does seem a bit intimidating and angry, and how that's shaped him and how he's grown up without a dad, but now he is a dad. Also, he makes a really interesting analogy towards the end about what grief is, that I think really hit me right in the feels. It really made it relevant for me.
It's weird that your feels are right here. My feels are right here.
But together, we make a whole.
It's true. Let's bring on Mike Wasko.
Weird, sad, funny path, but we're here to help you laugh. It's the Dead Dads Podcast.
Losing your dad sucks, but talking about it doesn't have to.
We are not therapists professionally. We may like to think we are, but we are not.
We give really good advice, though, just not medically or therapeutically. Although if you do feel better after it, that's okay. You can still listen to us.
But we will bill you for that. We're also not doctors.
That's true. We're definitely not doctors. I once was a doctor, but then was immediately removed from doctor status.
You just had a lab coat on. Like, that's not a doctor.
That was the problem. Enjoy the next episode of Dead Dads.
It's a weird, sad, funny path.
All right, so welcome to Dead Dads. We have another guest today. Scott, do you want to introduce him?
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to Mike Wasko.
Hello.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah,
Really
I
happy
immediately
be
went to
here.
Mike. There's no Michael in this, is there? There's Mike.
No, just people who want to put me in my place call me
Right.
Michael.
Michael?
Like
Michael.
that, yes. But
Right.
Mike Wasko, of all of the guests that we've had so far, I know your dad passed away quite a long time ago.
Long time ago, over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, I want to learn a little bit about you. Can you tell me a little bit about why you decided to do the podcast?
We were just saying earlier on that, I mean, my dad was quite young when he passed away, and I was younger, obviously. But I find that a lot of my friends who are my age, I mean, their parents are now, it's just becoming more common. It's endemic now. Like our parents are at the generation now where, whoa, it's happening, quite frequently. And statistically, it's usually the dads first. And I'm lucky enough to have a lot of really good buddies, good guy friends and stuff. And like, it's a bit nuts how many of them are starting to lose their fathers now. And I actually get that a lot. Like, well, you've been through it, And I'm like, yeah, a while ago for me. But
So people are coming to you.
I got somebody.
advice
My
area.
best friend, his dad died 2 years ago, and it's. I feel like I've watched this story unfold quite a few times over the last few years, and it's never fun for anyone. Your parents get older and they need help, and I hope that. I mean, I'm really fascinated to listen to your other episodes of this podcast because. And I think it'll be really useful for people who are going through it because,
Hopefully.
yeah, it's we all get our turn.
It's funny, not funny that everybody dies, but also it feels like as you get older, you become more, I don't know, it's among you more, whether it's like, I started noticing my parents' friends dying first, obviously they're getting older. And then when my dad died, it's almost like when you're like try to buy a new car and you all of a sudden see that car on the street more. It's just parked everywhere, driving past you. I find now that I'm like attuned to all my friends' parents passing away as well. It's interesting.
And you sort of, you can't help but feel a little shard of your own loss when when you're hearing it from somebody that it's like, yeah, I intrinsically know what you're dealing with.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit more. I would love. Could you share more about your dad?
His name was Bob Wasko. He was a larger than life figure. My brother and I worshipped him. I mean, he was really fun. Way funner than I am as a dad, to be honest. He was an electrician for BC Tel when it was BC Tel before it was bought out by TELUS. He was one of the last he was a lineman. He was the foreman of his crew of guys, and they were all really tight.
Was he born here?
He was born in Winnipeg. His folks moved to Vancouver when he was about 2, so he grew up in the west end of Vancouver and in downtown. And First in Chinatown, actually. They lived in Chinatown here. My grandparents had a rooming house that they ran here in Chinatown, and then they eventually saved up some money and they bought a hotel that was on Nelson Street called the Langham. And so my dad and his two brothers kind of grew up there working in the hotel, and then the city expropriated it in the mid-'60s to build the extension for the extended care unit for St. Paul's.
So he grows up here, basically. He's basically BC, right? From 2 years old, arguably.
Yeah.
Right in downtown. And becomes, over the course of time, becomes a lineman. That was his sort of chosen career, if you like.
I mean, I think he was just a bit of an orangutan when he rolled out of high school, and it was a much different world then. And, I think him and his buddies had the idea that they were kind of building the province. They were extending all that telecommunications infrastructure. I'll never forget when I was a kid, he came home with his first bit of fiber optic cable, and I was like, "Look at this!" And he was like, "This is going to change the world." And he was like, and he said, "Some young dumb punk is going to have to go up north and redo everything that I did up there." And he said, "But instead of a spool that fits on the back of a huge truck, it'll be a spool that hangs off his belt." And he's like, "This is crazy," and I was like, "Oh, okay." But
I was trying to eat here, Dad.
Yeah. But for him, it was like a whole new deal. And
so what was he like as a dad as you were growing up? Was he like the participatory dad? Did you guys do a lot of sports and stuff?
I don't think he was participatory in the way that my mom would have liked. He was a lot of fun in some unconventional ways. He could also be a bit brutal. My dad was the king of letting us fail. And he was just like, because he was like, I don't know, he's like, "You're going to fuck that up if you do it like that." I'm like, "Oh, fuck, whatever." And they're like, "Oh, no, it all fell apart." And he's like, "Oh, you're not going to do it like that again, are you?" Just sort of like he just over and over and over.
And do you find yourself balancing out that feedback now where you remember that's how he taught you and that gave you the genesis to be who you are, but now you're like, do I do that or do I let that happen?
It's a balance, right? Like if I see them that they're gonna hurt themselves, or injure themselves, I'm like, and then I sort of get in there and sorry, we're not doing that.
So he's tough love. He's willing to let you make mistakes, and also he's willing to let those mistakes be relatively severe if they need to be.
How long ago did he pass?
2003. So a long time. Yeah.
And how old were you when that happened?
29.
Wow. And can I ask how he passed?
Cancer. Yeah.
So when was he diagnosed and when did he ultimately?
Fall of 2002. I was working at a theater festival, the Shaw Festival out in Ontario, having a great time out there. And I was, coming to the end of the season. I was going to go to Europe and have some fun and do all sorts of stuff. And then my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, she was in a show at Canadian Stage in Toronto, and I was on my day off, went in to see her show, and we're hanging out, and my phone started ringing, and I saw it was my brother in Vancouver. I'm like, "Oh, this is weird." And it's, like 11 o'clock in Toronto, and I was like, and it was my brother, and he said, "Yeah, oh my God, I'm in the hospital with Dad. We went out for lunch and he passed out in the parking lot, and we called 911 and we're here. We don't know what's going on." And side note, my parents had been split up for quite a while. They split up when I was about 13. So that was sort of independent of my mom. But anyway, so I was like, okay, some kind of emergency happening here. I went to my bosses at the Shaw Festival and said, "I'm having a family emergency." They were great. They gave me a plane ticket. I packed up overnight and flew back to Vancouver. Dad was in the hospital for about a week while they did like this battery of tests and stuff on him, and then sent him home. And then I kind of moved in with him, and he seemed okay, once he sort of made his initial recovery. And then our family doctor, who was his doctor, called me and asked me to come in. And he wasn't the greatest doctor ever, but we'd had a lot of sort of ups and downs with him over the years, but he was like our family doctor. And then he sort of said, "Yes, no, your dad has a large tumor in his esophagus. There's not much we can do about it." He says, "We can reduce it with radiation to make him more comfortable. This type of tumor, there's not much we can do about it, and eventually it's going to metastasize to other things." And I was like, "Oh." I was like,
essentially, he delivered the news
to you, and he's like, "Yeah, so best of luck." And I was like, I walked out of the, and I asked him, "Well, how long does he have?" And he's like, 6 months tops. And I was like, "Okay." And I walked out of there going, "Sorry, am I supposed to deliver this news?"
Oh, he didn't tell your dad?
No, he told me.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, and my dad was also the kind of guy that he rarely took information firsthand. He verified things, you know, and there was, you know, a lot of we had a lot of differing opinions on stuff. So sometimes if I said something that he didn't agree with, I was like, I'm going to look into that. So if I just rolled in and said, actually, Dad, you got 6 months to live. Sorry. Says who? You know, like, you know, and
Where'd you get your medical
where'd
degree?
you get your information from? So I talked to a couple of friends. I said, "Do you think that's weird?" And they're like, "That's fucked, man. No, your dad's doctor should be delivering that news."
Yeah,
to
your
him.
dad's an adult. He's still within.
Yeah.
Like he's not out of his.
I don't even know if that's like legal.
No,
really.
and so anyway, so I called him and said, like, I don't really feel comfortable delivering this information. Like, I feel like you should be doing it. Like, okay, and the first time,
I guess.
in our lives, he made a house call and he came down and said, "Yeah, so sorry, Bob, this is A, B, and C." And my dad was very much like, "Well, Mother Nature's going to have her way no matter what."
So do you really think he's dealing with it, or
There was one point that, you know, he was saying to my brother and I, he's like, "You know, it'd be good if doctor gave me something. I don't feel so shitty. You know, I don't feel so shitty all the time." Yeah. And I was like, "Well, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean shitty?" I said, "Like, do you feel like physically shitty or like emotionally shitty or like that you're literally covered in shit? Like, what are you talking about?"
what do you think he was asking?
I think he was asking for antidepressants.
He just felt sad.
I think he felt a little bit sad.
Sad, scared, anxious.
Yeah, you know, and my dad also, he'd had a bunch of other health problems earlier on in his life. But he never let it slow him down. Like he would talk to anybody who would listen about his, you know, health problems and stuff, but he was always like, still taking trips and going places and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And so this was just kind of an extension of that. He was like, "Oh yeah, so I got cancer," and blah, 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 you know, and it, I don't know, he was like more than willing to talk to people about it. And I think my dad was just like, "No, I'm going to keep it in third, like as long as I can."
I still can't believe this. So you were given both the challenge to deliver the news, which
I didn't end up doing.
Which you didn't end up doing,
Yeah.
but then
You still
had
had to
like,
deal with it.
You still had to deal with it.
You still had to get the
sit with
doctor's
it.
attention.
Yeah. So you're given the challenge to have to make the decision to not, again, address it. But then in between the period where, so he's received the information, and this is, I guess, over the course of months, right? He's just sort of sitting there.
That was about a couple of weeks after I got back, where we got the action. After all the tests results came back, and
so you're not working. You're just basically
I'm
there,
just camped
hanging
out at my
just
dad's and taking care of
watching
him.
to see how it lands with him. Yeah.
And once he got out of the hospital, he sort of perked up considerably. Then once the diagnosis came, it was like, okay, and then there was all these things about his diet and this and medications, and I had to take him for radiation. And
did you become his carer?
For my brother and I both did. It was mostly me because like my brother had his own place to live and stuff like that, and I'd been living out in Ontario for the most part for the previous 3 years, but then I just moved in with my dad and took care of him until he died.
And this is all when you were 29.
Yeah.
You were given this news and had to deal with it all in your formative years, right? Like it really hit you fast and
it was a big turning point for me because the previous 3 years it was kind of like my university years because I was just working. I was living with some really good friends. I was working at the job I loved. We did everything a lot. We were, you know, working out a lot and working a lot and partying a lot, doing everything a lot. And it was just about me, and me. You know, I was just, you know, living a bit of a rock star life and having a great, great time. And then it very quickly changed gears to like, okay, no, family is in trouble and people need help. And my father, who had always been so capable, he was always had some project on the go or some reno he was doing or some property he was fixing up. And we were always just going from project to project to project. Oh, we got to go here and pick up this up. We got to get the money from here and go there and go to the hardware store and pick this thing up. And then we got to go in there and put the ladder up and get on the roof. And I'm like, oh my God. And all of a sudden he can't do anything, you know, like, and he's just, his balance is off. He's weak. He's, you know, it's sort of like,
what was it like to watch that?
Really, really hard. My dad wasn't old, but he was old before his time. He was only 57 when he passed away, but he'd already sort of like he aged a great deal in a very short period of time, and he went from being very capable to sort of like you know, and I mean, and that had been going on for a while because he'd had some other health things. He had some like edema in his feet, so he sort of had a bit of an old man walk, even though he wasn't that old, and it's funny how your perspective on those things changes, you know, and he always had some henchmen kind of living with him, a buddy who was on, you know, sort of down on his luck, helping him with some reno or something. And I remember my dad around that time, he needed something taken to Revenue Canada. So I need you to, I don't want to put it in the mail because I wanted to get there in time. You know, I need you to take this to the office downtown. I'm like, yeah, well, that's fine. I'll take it. So, okay, well, here's what you do. I was like, you take the truck, take Harry. You need at least three guys. And like, so one guy, you can like drive around the block. So the parking's a fucking nightmare down there. So like one guy can drive around the block and you go in and then you like
a fight, like a bank heist.
Yeah. I'm like, no, because that's the way he would need to do it. Because I'm like, no, you know, like I'm just going to take the bus down there. Yeah. and I'm not going to park at all.
Totally.
And I'm going to walk in, but I mean, like, my dad couldn't walk the 5 blocks from the bus stop to where the office is or whatever. And like, that just wasn't. So, I mean, in his mind, this is the only way it can be accomplished. I'm like, I can carry an envelope in my inside pocket and walk there and deliver the thing. And maybe I'll even go get some lunch after or something. You know, it's like,
Totally.
and he, all right, Mr. Independent.
Yeah.
His expectation of the way things would unfold sort of had changed in recent years.
So I get this sense that he dominated your early years, right? Like he always had something going on. You're going along with him, bring the ladder, do the things.
Yeah.
And then, drastic word, but you escape to a certain degree because you get to go somewhere else. You're, you're living this life
Cross country.
away from him
Yeah.
and away from that. And then
We
all
had
of a
a-
sudden you're pulled back
Yeah. And
for a very drastic period. Was that a traumatic feeling? Was there something in there? Like, did you have a sense of like, I've
We had
been
a-
returned? Or
after I graduated high school, I moved in with him for a while. My mom's place was very much sort of very structured and nice and good food and do your homework and all that kind of stuff. And then my dad's place was like New Year's Eve on Mars, 365 days a year. You know, there was always him and his pals like doing whatever. And like me and my buddies and my brother and his buddies could go there and hang out too. Is like, as long as we left the place clean and everybody behaved themselves, everything was fine, you know. And when I was younger, like my dad was a bit of a, you know, come on, we got to do this. Like it was just like there was no arguing about it. But then when I started to get older and going back to school and working my own jobs and doing stuff, like, you know, you do start becoming a man on your own a little bit. And it got to the point where I was like, I can't just fucking drop everything for you. Every time you ask me, he's like, and he just like could not compute. We ended up having a really big falling out. And then I just fucking launched out the door and went and stayed at a buddy of mine's place for a few weeks. And then my brother called me and said, like, oh, Dad just told me that if you don't come and get your shit out of the house, in the next day, it's all going to end up on the lawn. And I spent half an hour while my buddy stood outside, like with all these boxes, just like shoveling all my stuff into boxes while my dad just like shrieked at me the whole time. We didn't speak for about 9 months after that. And then my brother and him had a falling out. And then he phoned us both. He's like, listen, neither of my sons are talking to me. Something is wrong. Please come and talk to me. And so we all went and had a big hash out of all this stuff. And basically it was just a really painful and janky transition of like, yeah, Dad, we're not employees. We're not minions, like we're developing our own lives and our own jobs and our, and we, when I say, like, I got to study, I'm not trying to blow you off. I'm not trying to subvert what you're trying to do. I have my own stuff that I have to do, and I'm managing my time, and he's like, okay, yeah, I get it. A slow, janky, painful process. But on the other side of it, we were all sort of closer than ever. So, by that time, I think my brother and I felt a bit more freedom to just, pursue the things. And then my dad was like completely supportive of all those things and everything. But yeah, I had been largely on my own for the 3 years leading up to that and leading a pretty independent life on the other side of the country, like away from
and then
my
you have
family
to
and stuff.
return.
And then you return and it's like, oh man. And and there's a lot of things like around the house that had been neglected and things with finances. And it's like, oh my God, so it was sort of just getting a grip on all of that. And
In a weird sort of way, it kind of feels like you were being prepared for what inevitably happened. He died at an early age. You were quite young. It sounds like he was, not difficult on you, but he let you fail. He let you learn from those failures. He was kind of bossing you around a bit, but also giving you that independence. Like, do you think then, I don't know, like not in a spiritual way, but sort of a metaphysical way, like it all kind of was leading up to that moment of you losing him at a young age?
This is an interesting thing. My wife and I have a bit of push and pull about how we deal with the boys and stuff sometimes. And a lot of my guy friends have this, my wife says, you're always yelling at them. I'm like, I'm not yelling at them. You've heard me yell. That's not yelling. I said, what I'm doing is speaking clearly and without humor because I need them to understand that what I'm saying right now is important. And I also just don't want the first stern word they ever hear to happen out in the world and for them to be like, oh my God. And then it's like, it's just words. It's just volume. It's just that. Like, you should be able to take that in. And
Right.
I always say, like, with my old man, it's like, I've never been more intimidated by anyone than my father. And I've had other people in my life, like that I've encountered in the workplace and in relationships and things that, try to sort of dominate me or run roughshod over me in some ways or intimidate me in some way. And I'm like, I appreciate your effort, but you're no Bob Wasko, I'm afraid. And in a way, I'm like, I didn't enjoy it probably while it was happening, but when I think about it, I'm like, what a gift. What a gift was that?
Do you have any sense from your dad? Obviously, it was a long time ago. Did he speak about his dad?
Yeah. So his dad...
Does it feel similar, apple falling from the tree?
My grandfather had been in and out of jail all through his younger years. We knew that he did time in Manitoba and he did time in Alberta. His first conviction was in Manitoba during the Depression when he was 18, and he whacked some guy over the head down by the railroad tracks and robbed him and got caught. And he got sentenced to 18 months in jail, and back when they would give you lashes. So, I mean, if you ask my dad, he was the greatest guy that ever lived. And if you ask my mom, she said he was the meanest son of a bitch she'd ever met. So somewhere between greatest guy in the world and meanest son of a bitch.
When after he died, who did you go to for advice?
Did you have a de facto father, or did you?
Not really. I was really at sea after he passed away. I was very emotionally erratic and angry, really full of anger. And I could tell that I wasn't really, in the driver's seat, and drinking too much and couldn't sleep. And so I ended up going to see a shrink, wonderful guy named Paul Sabina. I would actually be surprised if he's still alive because he was fairly old even back then. And he was really interesting, actually. He was like, "So why are you here?" And I was like, "Well, my dad died, and he had lung cancer, and I took care of him for 6 months, and this, that." And he was like, "Were you close with your dad?" And I was like, "Yeah, very." And he said, "Did you love him?" "Yeah." And he said, "Well," "How'd he die?" I'm like, "Cancer." I said, "And you took care of him?" And I'm like, "Well," he says, "that all sucks." He says, "That's terrible." And he said, "Well," he says, "there's not much I can do about that." He said, "What's happening to you is that you're grieving, that you're in a state of grief." And he said, if you weren't in a state of grief, then I would be worried. He said, because I think, because we can talk about your dad a little bit if you want. He says, but I think that your father's death is just the biggest thing that's happened to you lately. And he said, I think that your father's death is the proverbial straw that's kind of bowing your back a little bit. And he said, what we're going to do is we're going to go and look at the laundry list of everything else that's happened to you in your life. And he goes, but as far as like feeling sad about your dad being passed away, there's nothing I can do about that. He says, that's just grief and that just takes time. And he goes, that's just a perfectly natural response. And that's the cost of loving somebody, is that when that love's taken away or they are taken away, then grief is the cost of loving someone. And
Did you find yourself agreeing with him?
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay. And it was a really interesting process. Like at the end of it, I sort of felt like I could, things that were sort of no-go zones for me for a long time, all of a sudden were like, yeah, I can talk about that.
What was an example of a no-go that he pulled out?
Once I arrived at a party shortly after a really brutal fight had taken place, and this kid got curb stomped, and I arrived there just sort of after it happened, and that was a pretty traumatic thing to see. And he died. He was dead. He died, and so I didn't really talk about that for a really long time, and I still hardly ever mention that, but I can see it as clear as day. But before this work, like there's no way I would even have mentioned that in a public setting. And one thing that Paul said was like, "Oh, don't worry. The trauma's not over. Like you're going to have all kinds of new trauma." And eventually I was feeling really good. I said, "I think I'm done here." He's like, "Oh, great." He's like, "Come back in 10 years after you've had a couple of kids. You'll be good and fucked up then."
So the death was the catalyst, but ultimately it created an avenue to deal with other things and give you an avenue to start to pursue a bunch of other stuff that had maybe nothing to do with the death. But luckily, the death kind of let that happen. So it's sort
like
of a weird way
like
of looking at death
detour,
as a gift.
It's like while we're on this detour, what else is going on? What else has been left unchecked? And
yeah, I always saw therapy as sort of like an indulgent activity. It felt like I don't really have anything to talk about, and like I don't want to bother you. But then when my dad died, it was like I've got something to talk about, and then it. To your point, it turned into everything else except my dad. It was everything.
I think it's more like going to the chiropractor. It's like life will just bend you out of shape after a while, and it helps to have somebody to like crack, 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 sort of put you back in a way where you're a little bit more efficient. Like I haven't been to therapy for a long, long time. I generally feel, I get stressed, but I'm not a particularly anxious person or anything like that. Day-to-day things stress me out, but I find they're fairly causal. But I have friends who are like in therapy, and it's helping them immensely. And I was like, maybe if I got one day for a little bit of more time and a little extra money, then maybe I will. But I don't feel a pressing need for it at the moment. But I definitely did back then.
Well, I think what Roger asked you originally, which was if there was if you ended up having somebody that you were going to.
I guess Paul
dad.
was kind of the person.
And he became kind of like a father because he was giving advice of a way, right? Like it was specific and mostly obviously was coming from you. But over the course of the year, so you progress through therapy, you get out, I guess, or finish with that for a period in time. I'm interested. So there's a period, I guess, where you become a father.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to ask you, as you become a father, what's running through your mind as you're becoming a father for the first time?
Oh, that's a really good question. I feel like when my first son was, getting into those, toddler years where they can try your patience and stuff, I definitely noticed my anger flare a lot, and I was like, oh, like, again, I'm Mr. Easygoing, and it's like, oh no, Bob Wasko is alive and well, like under there, not far under the surface, and like, this kid is like not even 3 years old. I don't think this is appropriate or helpful, and so it did, make me really just look at those tendencies and how. I think we're all influenced by the template that we're raised with, and I think we have the luxury to look back and see which parts were useful and which parts weren't. Not everything my dad did was useful, like he was a pretty reactionary, reactive guy, and he was very much a his way or the highway sort of guy.
Takes 5 people to go to the bank.
Yeah, exactly. He needs a team of henchmen. And he always had henchmen, but.
But now we learned that he learned that from his father.
Yeah. So I don't know. It wasn't all good, but it wasn't all bad either. And so I try to sort of employ the good parts that I can. And
did it come to you though, as your bro, like going into this world of a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old?
Yeah, I mean,
sometimes these things come to you, and you go, okay, I'm going to choose a path. I'm going to fork, and I'm going to go this way.
Yeah, definitely. When I would feel my anger spike, I would definitely. It's just what I tell the boys to do. When I'm just like, I just step away for a sec, take a few deep breaths, and I've actually found I'm not. I say this sounding like some kind of guru, and I am not, like, by any stretch of the imagination. But I feel like in those moments where I want to like lose it a little bit, I try and really like take a few deep breaths, step away from it, and then I really try to, especially with my younger one now, and he is a bit difficult. He's a bit ADHD, and it's sort of like, and I feel like just barking at him. I do bark at him sometimes, but it's not the best option. The better option is to like, hey man, like come down like actually to his level and be like, why I'm mad. I'm sorry that I snapped at you. You know why I snapped? And if you come down and just take the time to explain it in a way, where you treat him a bit more like he's someone in distress. But you know what I mean? Like, it's like, because they're just pushing boundaries and stuff all the time and seeing how far they can go with things. And with Eddie, my youngest one, it's like, if there's anyone that I've encountered since my father's death that reminds me of my father, it's my youngest son, Eddie. Like, that's a spooky thing. Like, I'm like, he was born 15 years after my dad passed away. And I'm like, I've seen this before. I'm like, I had it from this direction, and now I'm having it from this direction, and this is like a cosmic joke on me, and so sometimes I feel like I'm a little unfair to Eddie because my reaction is a lifetime in the making.
So he's like, Dad, I'm going to need you to drop me off at school. We're going to need a couple of guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, or he's just he's sort of a bit rigid in the way he does things in the same way that my dad did, and I think that I'm pretty convinced, my son has ADHD, and the more reading I've done about it, the more I'm convinced, like, the old man had ADHD, undiagnosed ADHD and I think a lot of his way or the highway was born out of the fact that, like, he just needed to control the situation so that he could control the situation so he knew what was going on. He would never enter into situations where he wasn't kind of the ringmaster because there was too much going on and he couldn't keep track of all of it, and he didn't want to be the guy that didn't know what was going on.
What would your dad think of you as a father today?
I think he'd be pretty proud. Yeah. I think he'd be, I think he would like love the boys, and and I've already taught them how to play poker and stuff, so he'd be happy about that. And
But have you taught him to cheat in poker?
yeah, no cheating. We didn't learn that.
Do you talk about him with your kids?
They ask about him all the
do you?
time,
Yeah.
and he's always been, because we have a picture of him hanging in the house where it's like where I'm probably about 2 years old, and when I was born, we lived in a rooming house in the West End, and it's on the steps of that rooming house, and I'm standing between he's sitting on the steps, and I'm standing between his knees, and we look very similar, and he's got long hair and beard and like that, and then I look a lot like my kids do, and people come in and like, oh, is that Dash? Is that Eddie? I'm like, no, that's me. Guy, that's my dad. And they're like, oh my God. They're like, that's some crazy continuity there. But like, and even the boys would see that picture and go, is that me? And I'm like, no, that's me. And then they're like, oh, who's that? I'm like, that's my dad. And I'm like, oh. And like, they see my mom's still around, so they know about Granny. And then my wife's parents are still around, so they know about Granny and Elizabeth and Granddad. And they're like, well, where's your dad? And it's happened with both of them. I'm like, oh, well, he died. And they were like, and for them, it opened up a whole, like, your dad died? And, well, yeah. Like, when? Like, oh, years and years ago, man. And they're like, but just like the concept of like people's dads die. Like, they were like, does that mean you're going to die?
Well,
and I was like, yeah, man, I am going to die. Like 100%. And for my, and they were both young when they came to those realizations. Like, it's not going to happen anytime soon, buddy. Like, you're going to be, hopefully you're going to be pretty old too when it happens, like, and don't worry. It's not, and it took a lot, especially for my younger one, took a lot of talking down after that, and I had some really amazing conversations with my older one when he was younger, and he just asked me all these questions, and we were lying in bed one night, and like I was reading to him, and then he would ask me like, well, so your dad this and that, and he was like, he said, you know what I'm going to be when I grow up? And I was like, what are you going to be? He's like, I'm going to be a guy who invents things, like a scientist. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And he's like, yeah, and I'm going to make a robot of your dad. And I was like, that's kind of terrifying, but like, but I appreciate
Adorable.
the sentiment, that's really sweet.
Wow.
Because I guess, I don't know if this is too on the nose, but you're approaching the age that he was, right?
He was 57 when he passed away, and I'm 52. So,
Do you think about that?
yeah, sometimes. I mean, my dad already had a whole bunch of health stuff going on by the time he was my age that I don't have. My dad was a functional alcoholic.
My dad died at 79. And in the back of my mind, for some reason, I think, I guess that's how long I have, which is ridiculous because that's not how that works. But it's like this clock.
No,
in
it's a
my
marker.
head
It's just your first.
that you just tick over and you're like, well, I'm getting closer to that age. And I can't get away from that thought. And so I guess I don't know if that occurs to you. Like,
Absolutely.
if you pass that clock, then
Right.
you're like, well, I'm living on borrowed time now. Like, this is extra time.
No, absolutely. I mean, I have to say, like, my uncles are still around, and they're in their 70s, and like, they're actually largely in pretty good health. They have, but so I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't mean every man in our family is condemned
There's
to
genetics.
die at
and
57.
And then there's environment.
And they still look pretty good and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, that's, maybe I'll end up like Uncle Ron. Like,
There's
that's
every
okay.
reason that
check-
it doesn't
checking
need
in.
to happen.
Yeah,
and I
you
cannot shut that voice off.
I know.
Can't shut that voice off.
and I mean, it's like,
It's a trope though, too, right? Like,
the
it's
world
just,
is a totally different place. Like, my dad like smoked a pack a day and like, had burgers for lunch every day and, and would come home and have a couple of beers and then a bottle of wine with dinner and then a couple more beers and then a cognac before bed. That was like every day for a lifetime. Also, my dad, when I was born, he was in his 20s. So, I mean, I didn't have my first kid till I was 39. So it's like, I'm a lot older. So the impetus to sort of take care of myself and be around for longer is pretty strong, but.
And I'm just reeling at some of the stories. I
Yeah.
think there's such a fascinating.
you're such a great storyteller.
Yeah.
Well, can I tell you one cheesy analogy I have for grief and losing people?
Please.
yeah.
I always I bust this out for some of my friends sometimes that when they're going through this because it just seems so overpowering in the moment. Whether it's your dad or whoever you lose, when you have that sort of loss and that grief. I always think of this documentary that I watched a while back, and it was all about the battlefields of World War I, and you can still go to them in France, and they're all like just farmers' fields and stuff now, but you can still see like the trenches and like where they were, like the contours in the land and where the big craters are and stuff like that. And I kind of think that like losing someone is like that. When the death initially happens is like this catastrophic explosion in your life that happens, that where you can't really function and you can't really take in normal day-to-day things, and the shock waves of that blast can be felt for a long time afterwards. And then eventually the dust settles and your ears stop ringing, and you can eventually start to sort of, it's still traumatic, but you can start moving around a little bit, but slowly over time, little bits of grass and shrubs and stuff start growing back. And eventually the landscape will look normal again, but there will always be a discernible crater there. It's not a thing that you get over. It's a thing that you just get used to.
What does it gets better sort of look like?
You know what, I would just say, take it one day at a time, be good to yourself, let time do its thing. And this is hard to say to everybody because not everybody has a great relationship with their father, but you can allow yourself to dwell on the good parts. I mean, in my case, my dad was mostly really awesome, but it's also okay to admit the parts that weren't great. And you just have to kind of approach those as they come.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And thanks so much for watching another episode of Dead Dads. If you want to, please do us a favor, like, subscribe, share, all the things. We're now on TikTok. We're now on Instagram. We've got a Substack. Do we still have the fax machine set up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you been manning it?
Have we got fax?
I guess you haven't been looking into it.
We should probably check that.
I've never been on TikTok before.
Oh, you're about to blow your mind. Thanks again for joining us. Hope to see you again next time.
Thanks, everybody.
It's a weird, sad, funny path, but we're here to help you laugh. It's the Dead Dads Podcast.